Well, it's a period, typical building of what we call Estado Novo, is our fascist government, and it was built during the World War II. And so it's a typical fascist building, and normally buildings on that period are buildings very well built with very good materials, and also very representative of a kind of state architectural language, so they had a message. But in general, what I'm really interested in is in the culture of materials and details and the way of assembled those materials. So I had a very good building to begin with. Well, always the first steps is to absorb and to understand the nature of the building we are working with. When the building is very qualified, and most of the buildings we have been working with are in renovation works are buildings that have a history, they have a kind of a value, intrinsic value. To begin with, we want that value to be enhanced and respected, and at the end dominating, because history is already one of the values we can relate to final buyers and people who are going to be living there. And the language of the buildings normally is already part of the broader context, neighborhood. And so we want that our work in those cases more kind of silent work, something like infrastructural, to enhance the qualities of the building for another 30-year period or so. Well, this was quite easy in this particular case, because these buildings, the whole block was built during World War, and I believe it was a kind of a large operation to push a kind of a depressive economical period, a little bit like in America did with the Empire State Building, to overcome this impact of Great Depression. So it was a building to create jobs, to move economies, to acquire materials, and so on. And so when we entered there, the building, each apartment was completely out of scale. It was like 25-room apartment. It's true that back then maybe a typical family would have 3 children, sometimes 4 children, average. Nowadays, Portuguese families are one son. In fact, average nowadays is 1.2, so we are decreasing. So families are nowadays much smaller than they used to be. So we refitted the whole building to be closer to what is contemporary family size families in Portugal nowadays. So we have apartments, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms, and still we have 8 apartments where previously we'd have 1 apartment. So the buildings before, they didn't really represent the families back then. They were totally out of scale, aristocratic, and so kind of a show off, even for the politics at that time. So it was kind of a propaganda type of buildings. So, and the whole block nowadays is a heritage block that we have to preserve its qualities. So these buildings were already kind of total works of art. So the term in German is Gesamtkunstwerk, is something that goes from the largest gesture to the minimal detail, and all of the different scales are worked out with a strong degree of precision. So here in this particular building, and in buildings in general, when we work in renovation jobs, we try to, as much as possible, not work on the great gestures, but instead on small gestures, things that you don't see right away, but as you get closer and you touch, then these details and this care about small sophisticated elements is there for you, so and you interact with them, but it's not something that we want to make it obvious. We want the history and the qualities of the building that we found to be the ones that are in presence, and then it's like a second text, more subtle and more of this one-to-one relationship. Well, I think the history is what defines us today in this short period of time that we pass through our existence, and it's a little bit our north, no? Is by looking at what people before us have done that we see the purpose of what we have to do right now. And so to value history behind us is to really, for me, is a device and a strategy to understand better what I have to do right now. And I know that somebody in the future will do a similar thing. So in fact, I think history is a long-running thread of continuities that we want to consolidate and continue as it is, seems obvious to us. There are many different layers of aspects in these buildings of this period. A lot of them has to do with the beginning of reinforced concrete structures. In fact, we looked at two different buildings of the same block when we began this, and one of them was half concrete and half wood structure, and this one was a fully concrete building. So they were testing new materials, and they normally have details, interior and exterior details, that are quite specific of that period of time. So when we start proposing new redefined spaces, we wanted as much as possible to let these details dominate the interior, because when you see the building from the outside, or you go to this block, you already expect a certain kind of language. The city memories direct us in this kind of expected perception. So we wanted this to be this refitting of the building to be something that we learn as much as possible from that language, and we repeat and continue this language in presence instead of reinstalling a contemporary language, so that ultimately it feels like there was no architect of today involved. It was a building that was just resized and refitted, because in fact the kind of social target that this building had in the 40s was very much for families that had many servants, and the quarters for rooms for maids and cooks and servants in general was huge. And nowadays the people don't live like this anymore, so a lot of these quarters for servants became apartments with full details, as in the living rooms, and so we basically brought the details from the main rooms to the new main rooms that took up servants, and this also redesign of the social status of the apartments and the rooms. It's hard to say, because a lot of it had to do with understanding better very specific constructive materials and details, such as, for instance, the facade of the building is a technique that was very typical in the 40s, and that nowadays people normally, when they want to fix it, they paint it, and paint is actually a technology that appeared later than this this marmorite, as we call, is a kind of aggregate with stone and concrete compressed. And this lasts very long time, but nowadays we don't have companies doing it. This got out of use, and so we had to go and find somebody who could do it, and to restore the technology itself that at the end is responsible for the very large and first perception of the building from the street. So the presence of the building on the outside, it depends very much on small decisions like this that are really about technologies that got out of use. And so we were recuperating this and finding people who are still willing to do and to understand how it's done. And this we did with many different aspects, and somehow it's very interesting to see, not just out of this building, of course, but with a process of renovation that is going on right now in Lisbon, that a lot of these old techniques and artisans, young artisans, are replacing what we thought was lost to continue and maintain the qualities of the buildings in the city. We have a lot of opportunities to design absolutely contemporary buildings, but we want, when we are dealing with something that is there and has qualities, to be deliberately silenced. Clearly, traditional technologies were all about sustainability, and then the world kind of in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. went wrong somehow, and developed materials that are polluting, etc. If we go back, we understand that they were very rooted to local products like coal or local stones, local woods, etc., etc. So nowadays the discussion is very much about understanding that we are building cities on top of natural settings that once were fully natural, and we have, through technology and engineering and macro infrastructuring, we have substituted all natural elements and rules with this belief that engineering was going to solve all the problems. And now we are dismantling this and reorienting our minds towards kind of symbiosis between construction and nature. We know for sure that the industry of construction is probably the most polluting industry in the world, and we have to take serious steps towards reducing this impact. And so we are reorienting all our choices towards the use of materials that are coming from closer sources, and especially that use as much as possible natural products such as wood and stone and products that are able to be reconducted into future constructions, assembled and disassembled, etc. Our office is called RX. It was a kind of a play of words of architecture, texture, and text. So we understand architecture as a kind of a vehicle for information, something that we can communicate with. And so this idea of communicating our beliefs and our choices, our understanding of our role in the world right now, being conveyed through our works is something that is totally key for us. We just finished a new international school here in Lisbon that is a full building, all in wood structure. And we are very interested in, instead of using concrete where we have to burn stone at 1,000 degrees and put a lot of CO2 in the air, we instead have to plant trees and put oxygen and then have an environment that is much more friendly and homey. It's a school and kids learn, so the building has this pedagogic message also for kids. I like to go there a lot. Sometimes I have meetings and I'm with the kids, and I feel that the kids feel at home there, and they enjoy school, and they enjoy a little bit extra because of the qualities of the space. And for me, the kids, to have the kids enjoying school better for some of the choices that I have done is something very encouraging to me. It's not a glamorous story. I didn't have anybody in the family who was an architect, so I liked the idea of construction in general. Like a kid, I like to build things with the hands, the little trolley, small things. We didn't have cell phones and internet and so on. We used analogic materials and assembled them. So this idea of constructing something and changing something with my understanding and tools is something that I thought it was interesting thing to do. And then I visited School of Engineering and the School of Architecture, and I liked the School of Architecture better. And then I discovered the magic of this profession already during the process. So I think we have to choose way too young certainly for the maturity I had at that point. And I got to learn and to become passionate with architecture as I went along. And in fact, first I did the full program, and then at the end the full program of 5-year program, so I was a licensed architect. And after that I stepped back and I thought that I had not learned enough in order to be able to do the really good qualified architecture that I saw when I was traveling. So I decided to go to the United States and really learn in some high profile schools and with really very encouraging and challenging teachers. And so at that point I really, for me, my relationship to architecture really dramatically changed. Well, if you ask this to any Portuguese architect, I'm sure 100% of them say Álvaro Siza. Álvaro Siza is an architect from Oporto. He's still alive and doing fantastic works. His teachings are very much about a kind of research on our own local condition, and through our understanding of that local condition to be present in the world as a global thing. His work also teaches us that architecture is a support for life, is not a protagonist in life. So it's something that is not a spectacle, is not something to be protagonist, is something to be support, and while being a support is an accumulative knowledge of construction, knowledge that we inherit from generations to generations. So it has this degree of consistency. So there's this has a kind of a degree of humbleness and a kind of abstract language as something that is not more than what's necessary. But then also he has this twist of unpredictable twist somehow that has this artistic component. But it's never in this show-off kind of presence. Is something always, you don't discover it right away. You discover as you get involved in the building. And this is really interesting because relationship with buildings is not the same as a relationship with images. It's with life. Now, in life, it takes time. And I like this, to go back, and if you go to see his buildings, you can pass by one of them easily because you don't notice, and this is clearly his intention. But then one day you pay a little bit more attention and you realize how interesting it is, and then you can go back and go back and go back, and the building always has something more to give you, and this is really interesting, especially when we make receptacles for everyday life, like housing buildings, like this building that we are mentioning, Antonio Augusto Aguiar 23. I'm a teacher in the architecture school, and every year with my students I study a different city in Europe. And we have done Amsterdam, London, Barcelona, Berlin, Prague, Greece, Athens, and last year Lisbon, because we were confined, we couldn't travel. And the study is always about what's specific about each city that makes that city unique. Not in an international kind of way, but in something that we find there, and that is the reason why we travel there. So understand and take apart all the elements of this architecture, and so we study 1 full year that city, and then we move from London to Berlin, and it's totally different. And so we investigate this specificity. So for me, to work in Lisbon is different from working on Porto or working in Aveiro or, of course, in Madrid or elsewhere. To travel, in fact, put their own body inside buildings that are relevant to the history, being a distant history or closer to us in terms of time. But in fact, to travel, it doesn't help Pinterest or this kind of digital image viewing. You have to experience with your body sense of scale, a sense of materiality, a sense of light and shadow, and the process of assembling, because normally it has a kind of effort and intelligence and knowledge involved that it becomes part of your experience.